good afternoon, everyone. I'm so sorry about my technical difficulties. That's totally me, though, right? Nice to virtually kind of see everybody, so to speak. My name is Jackie Swift. I'm the Repatriation Manager at the National Museum of the American Indian. I'm a Comanche and Fort Sill Apache. And so what we want to do right now is just kind of do a quick introduction of everybody, and then we'll circle back and say a few things and then start answering questions. I'd like now to turn it over to Lauren Sieg.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad to see you virtually. Wish we could all be together, but next year will be a new day, I think, for us. So my name is Lauren, and I am a research specialist in the Repatriation Department. And typically, my focus within the department is on the repatriation of ancestral remains and their funerary belongings. So we have we don't have regional specialties or anything like that within our department, but we have kind of what we call a two-track approach. And my track is not into your account. Just give me a minute. Focused, I think. Jackie, can you please join table number 2? I think Jackie needs to. Yeah, there you go. So my track is reflective of the priority of the museum since its inception has been the return of all the human remains to their communities of origin, regardless of the sociopolitical or geographic borders. So with that priority, I have my work cut out for me. But then, of course, there are many other items that we need to take care of and see to get home. So I'll turn it over to Risa to talk about that.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Risa Arbolino. I'm another repatriation research specialist with the National Museum of the American Indian. And like Lauren said, I also work on addressing repatriation claims, but and Samantha will talk about this as well next, but she and I both work with claims from tribes more for cultural items, sacred objects of cultural patrimony, and sometimes unassociated funerary objects. So I'm happy to be here today. We're happy to answer questions, talk about the work that we do, share our practices, answer questions. Welcome, everyone. I'll turn it over to Samantha.
Great, thank you, Risa. I'm Samantha Hixson, and I am the last of the repatriation research specialists in kind of our department. Like Risa mentioned, I work on the tribally claimed base reports and research. Risa kind of covered it all for us, and I'm just really excited to be here, get to see everybody, and answer any questions that anybody has. So I'll kick it back to Jackie and we'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Samantha. So sorry if my I'm so sorry about that, Lauren. I was trying to resolve it while we were talking, and that was not helpful. But anyway, thank you all for joining us today. Really excited about being here. And just to let you know kind of where we're at, we're coming from the ancestral homelands of the Piscataway Nation, and I'm in Southern Maryland. That's where I live. So, I'm not sure, I know that when people talk about repatriation, sort of that tagline is, it's almost like a branding. Repatriation and NAGPRA are synonymous with each other. So sometimes people talk about that and interchangeably. But if you're not familiar with the NMAI Act, there are 2 laws in the U.S. that govern for the return of human remains and certain cultural items. The first law was the NMAI Act that established our museum, and it held that first piece of repatriation language in there. And what people may or may not know is that that law only applies to Smithsonian museums. And so what does that mean? That means 19 museums, 3 research centers, and a national zoo. But really, it's the NMAI and natural history that have repatriation programs. And so we have this law, and the law, as we know, was established in 1989. our museum did not actually come up underneath this law until about 6 months later. So the language as it's written in the law today, talks about, these several thousand skeletons and crania, skulls that are that were part of the collection, but that's actually more in reference to natural histories numbers. Our museum came up underneath the Smithsonian about 6 months later. And so those numbers are not a reflection of the original Act language. And just so you know, full transparency, it was less than 1,000, and today we have less than 200. And everybody's kind of touched on this, but we do have two tracks of how we approach repatriation. Based on our founding position, our board, and those early years, we understood that the return of human remains was of paramount importance. And so that's how our museum started, with that as a priority, and that has actually been maintained as a priority. And so we have two tracks, right? We have a very proactive track, which Lauren heads up, for the return of human remains. And then we have claim-based claims, so claims that are asserted by tribes. So that's how we're able to approach both simultaneously. And with a small crew, we get a lot done, but there's an awful lot of it's a process. It's a very deep, involved process, and checks and balances that we go through in developing a report and then getting it to our board of trustees, who provide final determination. And as a matter of fact, there is a board trustees meeting today that's happening and we have a report that they will be presented today as well. So I don't want to get too far ahead of any kind of real questions that are out there. So Shannon, do we have anything that we can address immediately for anybody?
Yeah, we do have a question from Lillian Wills. Can y'all, maybe she's from Oklahoma, can y'all just give a quick overview of your educational and research backgrounds and how you got to the NMAI?
Good question. I'll just say, for my part, I have a master's in American Indian Studies. I worked at the museum in New York City when it opened, initially as a contractor, and then on staff, and came back to work for NMAI for the opening for the opening of the museum in 2004. So I've been with the museum quite some years. But I did go back to school in between to finish up my education. And that's kind of the quick and fast of my background. And I'm sure others, let's kind of go in the same order. They probably have much more interesting backgrounds that are relatable to many folks. So, Lauren?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to really date myself here. So when I kind of explain my pathway to the NMAI, I was an undergraduate when NAGPRA was passed and when the NMAI Act was passed. And it really made a huge impression on me. And it was foremost in our minds as students when we went into the field. My first field school was right after after NAGPRA was passed. And so I took a gap year between undergraduate and graduate school to earn money, a plug for getting out of school without a lot of debt. And then when I went into graduate school, I was a student in North American archaeology, but I always maintained my interest in repatriation and in NAGPRA. And an opportunity came up for doing some NAGPRA compliance work for a museum, and I jumped on that and really haven't looked back. That was over 20 years ago. So I did some work under NAGPRA. I did some contracting, and then the last step in this journey to NMAI was just having the extreme good fortune to be selected for a position here. And I just feel extraordinarily lucky and privileged to be part of the department.
I'll go next, I guess. My background is in anthropology and archaeology, and I sort of happened into NAGPRA work, repatriation work, after college in New York City, and I started working at the American Museum of Natural History in their Cultural Resources Office, which is their NAGPRA office, and really just took to the work, I guess, and found it really challenging and interesting, and then decided that I did want to pursue a career in that. And so I went to grad school and got my PhD in archaeology, and ended up working for the Smithsonian, first for the National Museum of Natural History, and then now for almost 10 years, 9 or 10 years, with NMAI. And I just, feel like NMAI has been a wonderful place to work on repatriation issues and, work with tribes, and it's been a great experience. So, kind of a little bit circuitous, but also kind of a straight path into repatriation for my career. So, Samantha.
Yeah, so I got my master's in ethnology from the University of New Mexico. And after that, I was lucky enough to get an internship in the collections management department here at the NMAI, which was really life-changing, obviously, as my career progressed, and just a really great eye-opener to how work can be done in a different way from the previous museum experience I had. After that, I kind of was pretty sure I was going down the collections management route. But, as is the case in most of the museums out there, it's a small crew and you kind of wear many hats. And so through that, I was able to get some experience working on some NAGPRA situations. And like Lauren said, I just this position came open 3 years ago, and I threw my hat and was lucky enough to get it. And I'm just running with it. And it's been an amazing experience with an amazing team and doing great work. So.
That was a great question. We have another question here. Let me put this on stage. This is Donna Gobian. She says, getting right into the weeds here. Do you find much resistance from the Smithsonian board in the course of your work? And if so, how do you get around that resistance?
Interesting question. So just to help clarify, the Smithsonian does have a board of regents, but our board has been designated as having sole authority. So when I say our board, I mean the NMAI has a board of trustees, and our board has been incredibly helpful and supportive in the work that we do. We probably have more checks and balances internally and obstacles to overcome internally in terms of, just making sure that we have all of our research down and information is pretty solid and combined in a report and presented in, well thought out way. And so, we don't get the kind of resistance that you would think that other boards might experience. Our boards have been very active, and that is a really great statement on behalf of our committee. So the way the NMAI Board of Trustees is set up is that there's the board, and then there are separate committees. And we have a repatriation committee that we work with directly, and then that information is presented to the board, which is the case today. So they get the final reports, and they make their final determination based on this very well vetted report that's in front of them. So I'm not sure if there's a whole lot of anything tough to say about, where that resistance is. You guys chime in if you can think of, oh, here's some resistance I'm not thinking about, because I feel like, honestly, I feel like they've been really supportive.
Yeah, Jackie, maybe it might be worth just mentioning that this is not a resistance issue, but just more of an example of how support in the right places really facilitates the work. And so for my work, this is a priority of the board and has been since the very beginning of the museum. And they made that very clear from their very first meetings that this needed to be a priority for the museum, and repatriation was important. But I will say, just being part of the Smithsonian family, that leadership matters. And we have a new secretary who is taking a good hard look at ethical practices in museums and in our histories, and looking at ways that we can ensure that we are becoming an institution that is associated with equity and with diversity, and that we don't have this stodgy old reputation as like, a place that only represents one group of people and only puts forward one voice. So that leadership is, I think, going to make a difference throughout the Smithsonian. But we were just very lucky to have the secretary step into this role. He had been formerly the director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and got that museum started, up and running, built, collections created. And then, so he comes from a particular background that he understands those issues. So I kind of expect even more great things out of the Smithsonian coming forward.
I agree.
That's great. I've got a question, and I hope some folks in the who are attending the session want to give their questions in the Q&A, or raise your hand, and we can actually bring you into the conversation here with us by audio and video. I've noticed that Nancy Vickery has joined us. Nancy, are you able to show your video or not? Can you hear us? Nancy, you're on mute.
I believe Nancy is currently indisposed.
Oh, okay. We'll come back to Nancy. But so I have a question, because in the work that we've done here at the association, and before my time with the Association on American Indian Affairs, it seems like people, both in museums and institutions, as well as within tribal governments, confuse how NAGPRA is applied versus how the NMAI Act is applied. So I've seen institutions treat their NAGPRA compliance processes as if they were following the NMAI Act and its research and reporting procedures. And I've seen tribes come to the NMAI expecting a NAGPRA process. So can you talk about those important differences between the NMAI Act and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act?
I guess I'll get us started, and then we'll have other folks chime in. But yeah, no, we've experienced the same thing. And it is an interesting thing. Let me backtrack a little bit, because I mentioned, we've got really two programs at the Smithsonian as a natural history. So we've got this law, right, that we work under, but we have two distinct policies that we follow. And what we know from both laws is that there's language in there that says, there shouldn't be anything essentially preventing you from going above and beyond the law. So that's the law it's the low bar level. That's the basic level. You have to at minimum pass that level, right? But if you go above and beyond that, might mean things such as lowering your threshold of evidence. And at NMAI, through our policy, we affect a lot of that, a lot of those changes. So we use a reasonable basis standard. The law does not require repatriation outside to federally recognized tribes or outside the U.S. And we actively do that. In fact, we were headed to Ecuador, Nancy, when she gets on, was it not last year? Was it the year before? How long have we been in this mess? But right before COVID hit, we were headed to Ecuador for repatriation. We just conducted a repatriation this summer with First Nations in Canada, and we are actively working on one for next week. So there are things like that that make the repatriation under NMAI a little bit unique, as are changes in the way things are expressed in the policy that are not in the policy. Right of possession, right? We don't assert a right of possession, and so we took it out. We recently changed the definition of human remains so that it shifts that position of authority over to the tribes and lineal descendants to make those kind of assertions on what they believe constitutes a human remain. So that's important. I think one of the things that's interesting, many of you probably know this, the GAO issued its report on repatriation for NAGPRA, but also for the Smithsonian about 10-ish years ago. And one of the things that they came out with was they said that they recommended for us to have a policy on culturally unidentified. We call it culturally unaffiliated. We're like, okay, well, we've been doing that work for 15 years at that date. Yeah, okay, we'll make you a policy. We'll do that because it was a no-brainer, right? So there are things that happen, and because it is a policy and it should be this organic thing that changes with the times, that recognizes where some of that language has been there for 30 plus years with the founding of the law, and so it's time to get a little facelift every once in a while. And I think one of the things that also creates a difference is that this concept of consulting. Our department motto is all roads lead to consultation, and should, when in doubt, consult. Even if you're not in doubt, consult. And it's all about maintaining those, establishing and nurturing and maintaining those relationships with tribes, because I think really, really at the very end of the day, what it gets down to is respect. And, we really try and keep those kinds of thought processes in mind. And okay, does anybody else? I'm going to stop talking because I'll just, how I am.
I'll just say anecdotally, Shannon, that's a question that is not unique to any particular group. Even internally within the NMAI, we look at old correspondence and see that a lot of our work was called NAGPRA at the time. And so we created an informal swear jar. So if anybody says the word NAGPRA about our work internally, but there are slight differences in the way we work and the policies we have. And then there are just some technical differences that, for people that are really familiar with NAGPRA, for instance, we don't publish Federal Register notices. And our inventories are not reported to the National NAGPRA program. But they're certainly available to anybody who would like to request one. And we can pop in the chat the link to go online and request an inventory if you are interested in getting one.
Can I just add to that, Lauren, what you said, just to explain why we don't, publish in Federal Register? So we know based on the law that we can look to NAGPRA. But we're not required by NAGPRA because we have our own law, right? But one of the reasons that we don't publish in the Federal Register is as we are in the process of doing the research, there is a constant communication. There is a constant process that's going on. So, for instance, if during that process, other additional interested parties became known to us, we stop and include them because that's important. And that way, if it stops and pauses a little bit, or we bring more people into it, it creates a greater sense of transparency, because by the time it gets to the board for that determination, everybody should be on the same page, and everybody should have the right and a voice to say, to chime in and say, I want to participate, I defer, I want to just be notified. I mean, just to be heard, right? And that way, you know, when the board does make its decision, technically on the day of, somebody could technically receive whatever back if that's been approved by the board. So we really try to do all of that kind of work in the interim and not after the fact, which not for nothing, I always felt it was a little kind of not fair. It's like, here's your 30 days and, you know, what if you miss that, you know? Anyway, that's one of the things I think is important to underscore, is to have that kind of extended communication happening during the stretch of period, you know, where you have that quality time to reach out and get everybody on the same page and have those kind of discussions.
That's great. That's great. We have another question in our Q&A I'll bring up. It's a history question, so get ready. From Lillian, where did the NMAI collections come from when it was first opened? Were they transferred from other Smithsonian museums? How did they decide what got sent to NMAI and what didn't?
Ooh, okay, that's a good one. I can start that one off if you guys want. And feel free to jump on in. But so the core collection that the NMAI represents was basically one man's obsession. George Gustav Heye was a very wealthy individual who was really prevalent in his collecting in the late 19th and early 20th century. It started off as just a hobby for him and kind of became a full-blown life's calling, we can say, to the point where he started hiring people to go out and collect items for him. And it became such a large operation. You know, we like to say he went through 3 wives and multiple apartments in his pursuit of collecting Native American items, that in 1916, the Museum of the American Indian Heye Foundation was formed as essentially a place for him to store all the items that he had collected and put on display for the public. So that the Museum of the American Indian Heye Foundation was up and running for many years until in 1989 with the passing of the NMAI Act, which created our repatriation program. The official transference of George Gustav Heye collection was transferred to the United States government, to the Smithsonian. So no other collections from the Smithsonian were integrated into this collection. We were kind of our own standalone new museum that was created. Of note, Heye lived and worked and collected and presented in New York City. And part of the NMAI Act, there had to be kind of a caveat. You know, New York was really partial to having the collection in their city. And so part of the conditions for the US government to obtain this collection was that there had to be a satellite facility in New York City. So that's why if you go to the lower end of Manhattan, you'll find the NMAI New York, as well as our facilities out here in DC. So that's kind of the quick and dirty, if anybody wants to add to that.
Hey, and if you all don't want to add to that, you know that I will. So as someone from outside of NMAI and the Smithsonian, the history of the accumulation of this collection is absolutely horrendous. And if you do any kind of research on George Gustav Heye, you know that he sent in, he left tribal nations with railroad cars full of sacred objects and other cultural patrimony from Indian country and brought back to him to create this institution. The pictures of what was in the high institution and how it was horribly taken care of. It's horrendous. And then the institution has always been, prior to it coming to the Smithsonian, has always been in controversy. And even the New York State Attorney General investigated the institution because it became the kind of center for Native American antiquities and art market. Items were leaving the institution, which was a New York State public charity, and going into the commercial market and private collections of people. And even the work I've done as an attorney has discovered that some of those items end up at auction even today. In fact, that leads me to a question I wanted to ask you all is, does the NMAI have any policy, or do they seek support and help from either law enforcement or Department of Justice when those items do come up from auction that still have the NMAI or the American Indian Museum tags on them? Is there any effort to try to get those items back because they were improperly removed from that New York State public charity?
I can attempt to answer that, and the short answer is no, we don't. And the work that we do on our museum, actually with each museum, is that it is very specific to its collections, its current stewardship, its current fiduciary responsibilities of the collection. So that doesn't extend out to items that are outside of the stewardship scope, so to speak. So no, there is not that kind of work going on.
And I could keep having this conversation with you, Jackie, but I want to move on and let other people have a chance. Veronica Passfield has her hand raised, so we're going to bring her in onto the stage here. Veronica, you going to show your video or just audio?
Thanks, Shannon.
There she is.
Hello, I'm Veronica Passfield. I'm a repatriation officer for Bay Mills Indian Community. I'm one of several repatriation officers there. A couple of questions for you guys as I prepare to start to do an assessment of your collection that may be related to my tribe and perhaps have relevance to our greater Michigan Intertribal Coalition called MACPRA, which some of you may have heard of. I think I would love to hear you speak to kind of the authority of the archive and the authority of the collections information. I'm particularly concerned about especially older items, which have scant, if any, provenance information. A lot of the provenance information with older collections is inaccurate. And I would like to have your perspective on why, we're decades beyond the NMAI Act and still we have so little information. I'll give you an example of an answer I got. I can't remember if it was from Eric Hollinger at National Museum of Natural History or the American Museum of Natural History. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I was told that, the summaries were submitted, but that the museum was awaiting a tribal repatriation request or consultation request to trigger additional research. So help me understand what I'm coming into from your perspective.
Let me just start with the first part of that, because I definitely want other folks to chime into that. So you're referencing obviously, other sister museums underneath the Smithsonian. So we can't speak to that specifically, but well, everybody would tell you that, you know, not just our museum archives or our collections history is faulty, but many are, and ours is no exception. And we come across that time and time again. And sometimes what's on the face value on the catalog card, once you get into a deep dive and really start to analyze the individual history of each item, then you realize how far off base it just might be. Sometimes there's nothing but like a culture on it. And sometimes that might be wrong. So there's a lot of research and effort that goes into, for instance, if you're talking about a repatriation case, which is a report, which is where a deep dive might go into on very specific items and kind of following the trail and the history of that item, where it came from, and all of the details within the museum, within the Smithsonian, and then even outside, because, you know, the collections history and acquisition vary so much. I mean, back in the day when High was creating this museum, the Museum of the American Indian, you know, think about those in sort of the Wild West days. It was like, it was you know, might pay for an excavation, or you might buy, sell, trade, handshake. You know, there are a lot of things that happened back when that we are just not standards that we live by today. You know, even up until, you know, Dockstader was, you know, left the NMAI right before the New York State Attorney, you know, right when that was happening, investigating the Museum of the American Indians collection inventory. So, you know, I'm going to stop talking there, but just to say, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of misinformation, and when we do consultations, one of the things that we really actively say and rely on is that if there is information that is incorrect, that you can supplement, that you can provide additional context or correct the record, we welcome that and have a very active way of including that information, so that it does have more, you know, correct information, updated information, more context to what may have been originally cataloged. And so let me turn that over, because I know that these guys have way more to say about it.
I just wanted to add that we actually have 2 proactive efforts that we're doing to address that very issue. So I can't speak for other museums, but it's an upside and a downside to our poor collecting records history. So we have all of these cataloged items from George Gustav High, 800,000 of them. Since then, we've been a lot better since we became part of the Smithsonian. And obviously the accession and catalog records are different from then on, but the prior ones were separated from their archival information. And so there were no accession records, so to speak. So we have a team of people at the museum who, over the past 10 years now, I think, have been systematically looking at every piece of paper in our archives to connect that to catalog numbers and create accession lots. And so our database is actually being added to on a daily basis. So when we send new inventories, when people request inventories, that information can sometimes be quite different and more updated and more robust in what we know about, you know, that item's history. So the second thing what we're doing is sort of a part of the Smithsonian effort towards digital transparency. And we are putting many more of our records online. And so when updates do happen in our database, that will also be reflected in the online information. So hopefully those 2 efforts together are somewhat addressing that concern, but yes, it's definitely a pervasive concern at many museums. And then, you know, the inability to sort of address that on a holistic basis. But we are doing those 2 more holistic efforts over the past few years that have made some strides addressing that issue. Not solving it completely, but
Yeah, we're also, that just reminded me, Risa, we're also, as a museum, undertaking a really massive effort to systematically enter all of the information that's been shared by communities that have visited over the years and had corrections, tribal corrections, names, information on the more appropriate forms of stewardship and care that items should have, any guidance about handling, all that kind of information. Over the years, we've always been collecting it, but it's been a real challenge with the way collections databases were set up to really kind of operationalize that. And but over the past couple of years, and especially during the pandemic, there's been a real push to get that information incorporated into our collections records, so that at least for the staff who are there and are responsible for the stewardship, that we have a better understanding that's not informed just by whatever is or is not written down in the old archival records. And that's been extraordinarily helpful. And of course, in repatriation, that is key, to have the information from the consultations, especially given gaps that we know we have in our written records.
Samantha.
Whoops, did I cut you off,
No.
Veronica, right in the middle of something? Or was that you, Samantha?
Oh, I don't know. I was just going to say, you know, everybody else kind of pretty well covered it, but it's understandable to be concerned when, you know, you're looking at an inventory and really the only information we have might be a state or, like Jackie said, a culture. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no path forward. And that's through consultation and extensive research. So that shouldn't stop you from, you know, putting forward whatever you think is appropriate.
Go ahead, Veronica.
Okay, so miigwech for that. And I mean, as a historian and a researcher and a curator, I totally get what incredibly painstaking, dense work it is to try to retrieve anything of value from older archives, as well as doing data entry. Like I really, it's like beadwork. It's crazy. It's so painstaking. So I get that. A few things I have to tell you guys where I'm kind of leaning right now, and I'm just giving you a heads up now because I'm coming at you with this sooner than later in general. So I'm looking forward to our work together. But, you know, I'm thinking about the Mellon report, right, where they looked at the staffing of American museums, and specifically Native American staff with, you know, curatorial status or higher, right? And if I'm not mistaken, I'm really bad at recalling numbers off the top of my head, but it's something like 66 Native American people have empowered interpretive, you know, leadership positions within American museums. And when you think of the millions of objects that are in collections, when you think of the millions of dollars that come into museums, how our objects, our cultures are monetized, it's really a stunning figure. So I feel like, especially in this moment of decolonizing, right, if we really mean it, that I would like us all to kind of hew to a higher standard where the museum leadership is not just waiting for overworked, overburdened tribes to proactively come in, which is important. And I'm not saying it's not important at all, because it is. But what if museums actually pursued things like, I'm thinking of, you know, I mean, there are people who are on this agenda for this conference who are pulling in $5 million grants for cultural preservation and awareness public history projects, right? Imagine if NMAI or, you know, other museums pulled in $5 million grants from Mellon to actually go to tribes, right? Come to us, have materials, and actually proactively speak to our traditional cultural knowledge keepers who can shed incredible light faster, more powerfully than an outdated archive and a database, which I, no criticism about that work because I know how important and hard it is. But I believe that we are in a new era now, and I encourage you to think about that and think about those ideas to present to your leaders and for tribes who are on the call to also pressure for such things. Because if NMAI came to the Mellon with an idea like that, or whatever fits for how you do things and however it fits with your consulting tribes, I have a hard time imagining that they wouldn't throw $5 million at that, like the way they threw $5 million at a lot of other things last year. So.
That's a great comment. Well, you've got some really great questions and suggestions, and I really love that. I think that we do have a Mellon Fellow. We have that in conservation, and I'm not sure what other. That's kind of in a different department, a different realm, but it sounds like we need to put you in contact with our development department. It sounds like you would be a great liaison for that. Because that is an important part. That is an important aspect, and that would be great to be able to have that kind of dedication effort. That kind of dedicated effort to do something just like that. So, Veronica Passfield. I'm gonna remember.
Like totally, we'll talk. We can talk behind the scenes. Please do not focus on me. Thank you. I know you're trying to be kind. I am probably one of the least experienced people on this call in a lot of ways. But I mean, the thing about the Mellon, and you guys may or may not know that, is that you can't just go apply for a Mellon. They don't have a grant cycle, et cetera. There's this whole, and maybe people on this call know more than I, but it's almost like you have to be invited to apply. So it really, in that way, I think has to come from within the institution. So that's part of why I'm bringing it up to you guys, is something that you might think about. But I really, if we really want to be decolonized, like we look at the especially high collection that is amassed within the context of genocide, of people who are so desperate that they would relinquish the sacred objects of their relatives, right? I mean, you have to be pretty hungry, and your kids have to be pretty hungry to do that, right? So to flip it a little bit, flip the script a little, get out of kind of your own process a little more and come to us. It would be a really nice way to sort of reverse the tracks of that railroad car, or all those hundreds of railroad cars that dispossessed tribes and enriched your collection. So anyway, I could go on, and I'm just going to be done. So thank you. And
Thank you, Veronica. That's great.
I see that Nancy's joined us kind of sideways there. Nancy, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself? You're going to have to.
Yes, hello, and apologies. My name is Nancy Vickery. I'm happy to be. I've actually been joining you, just had some technical difficulties, but I work in repatriation, have been here a number of years, have focused on international repatriations for quite a few years, as well as just our case management database system as well. So I'm happy to be joining you, now with video, although I know time's ticking here. But it's been very interesting and helpful to listen to these questions.
And that's okay. If we go over to, that's all right. If we have questions coming in, we have Lena Bomelum.
Okay, now how do I do this?
Who is an elder ceremonial leader coming in to join us. Hi, Lena.
Hi, let me see. How do I unmute?
No, you're not muted. I can hear you.
Okay, cool. So I have a story. It's been several years ago. My husband and I were back at the collections in Suitland, and we were downstairs in one of the collection rooms, and it was all cement walls. There were no windows, and they had my husband's Tolowa, so they had the Tolowa collections out. And I guess I want to share this because the importance of the people working with your collections to know that the spirit on the pieces that are in the museums are still alive. They still have a purpose. They were created for a reason. And because of genocide and all the things that have happened to us, some of them ended up in museums, and they had a nice collection. So we were looking at the pieces, and so we formed a circle to do a prayer at the beginning of it. And mind you, there were no windows, so there's no draft. And so we had our eyes closed, and my husband was singing some songs. And then there's this breeze that went right through our legs. And he started singing this one flower dance song that's for the girls' coming of age ceremony. And I hadn't heard that song before. We've brought back the flower dance, and we sing the songs we know, but this was a new one. And we went, wow. So I looked at him, I go, that was interesting. He goes, yeah, that was a different song. So he knew the direction it came from. So when we were done, we went over to look where the direction the song came from, and there was a shelf. And on that shelf, there was one, because it was a flower dance song, and there was a counter basket that we use when we do our flower dance ceremony. So we took that basket off the shelf, and we opened it up, and there's little counter rings for each round of the flower dance ceremony. And on the bottom of that, there was a little white cotton cloth. And we opened it up, and that girl's belly button was there. So for us, for traditional people, when we look at the collections, it's has a lot of meaning. It's sad that they're there, but I'm glad they're there. So they'll have a chance once again to know that the people and the place they came from were still there. Because at the time a lot of these collections were taken, it was the part of when the destruction was going on. And for us in northern Western California, it was devastating. For the Tolowas, they experienced the second largest single massacre in United States history for the people at one point. So to have those pieces know when we sing their songs that we're still here, we're still doing our ceremonies, that's for the pieces, because that's their purpose. And for the jobs that you guys are doing and the ones who handle the regalia, it's important to know that those pieces are still alive. And that was so powerful that song came back because they heard us singing. And they're going, oh, it's like, oh, my family, they're still here. So it's a positive. You know, there's doors that are open to allow those things to come home, to dance again, to sing again, to be a part of the community where they came from. So I just wanted to share that as an experience, because this has been, probably 20 years ago or something that we did that. So I just wanted to share there's good things that can come out of the collections. I just wanted to share it with you guys, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you for sharing that story.
We've got, let's see.
Oops, sorry, I was having a little technical difficulty. I just wanted to echo Risa's comments. Thank you, Lena, for sharing that. That was very, that was powerful, and it was appreciated. And just to let you know, there are, we've definitely understand that and have seen and heard those experiences before, and it doesn't go without acknowledgement that's really appreciated. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but the way that the CRC is created, even though the room you may have been in didn't have any windows, the way the CRC is created is that there is a section of it that does have like full windows, very specifically for that sort of experience for the items and the spirits of those items, so that they are able to visually experience and see the outside. And as a matter of fact, the CRC was created with some of those concepts of Native Indigenous concepts in mind. But thank you for sharing that. That was very nice.
Got a few more questions. Here's Kathy McCloskey. Are there any publications about Doc Stater and the investigation by New York State? I know of one. I think Ted Carpenter wrote a book. I'm forgetting the title. It was there was a lot of redaction that he had throughout the book, and supposedly a book of removing all those redactions was supposed to be published after he passed away. I know he's passed away about 5 or so years ago, but I haven't seen the a new publication come out about those stories. Do you all know at NMAI any other good histories about that?
Go ahead, Lauren. I was just going to add that there's the high and the mighty. There's lots of information out there about him, but Lauren, I'm sure you probably have some other more specific publications.
Yeah, and I know while I was working for the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, we did a FOIA request of New York State Attorney General documentations, and got a whole hell of a lot of documents that we went through. So that those documents may still be available if anyone wanted to do further research. I might be able to help you there. We have another question. What are the NMAI's current policies on displaying and or loaning out funerary objects, sacred objects, and other culturally sensitive objects?
Ooh, that's a hot button issue. So, okay, can you display that question one more time? I want to make sure I break it down.
Oh, no, I don't think I can. Let me see. No, I can't. It's unfortunately I marked it as answered and it went away. But it's in the Q&A. It says, what are NMAI's current policies on displaying or loaning funerary objects, sacred objects, and other culturally sensitive objects? Oh, here we go. Show on stage.
Okay, so so one of the things right now, I mean, it's very much new and in the process of being much more diligent about the loaning of funerary objects, and this goes outside of our department because this is part of the NMAI's curatorial council and that the part that they play in how things go out on loan. But one of the things that's being scrutinized in a much more diligent way is, when a loan comes in, what is the context of that loan, right? How has the requester, are they working with a tribal community? Have they engaged in consultation and received permissions from a tribal community? There's all of those kind of questions that are starting to be prompt and become much more solidified. There are things that are out on loan happening before this sort of new discussions have been taking place. But just like, there are certain things that that the NMAI may not know is sacred, or may not know that. And so and may not have a full breadth of the funerary context of items. And so I think that there's been much more of an effort to kind of look into that kind of, those kind of requests that come in. It's not perfect, I can tell you that. And there's a long ways to go, but it's a much more recognizable and diligent effort to be cognizant of those requests and how they play out, and especially what what involvement the tribal communities have been a part of that. And it gets into splitting hairs when the further you go back in time, then there's a lot more work to be done because there's a lot more folks to consult, right? So it's a process, and it's definitely something that the NMAI is working to get a better handle on and to address in a much more sophisticated way, I suppose.
I just wanted to chime in too on the flip side of that. We have done in the past loans to tribes of ceremonial items. So that is something that we have done several times over the past many years.
Yeah, that's correct. And so on that, if a tribe is requesting their own items, those kinds of issues are not so high, but that's not an issue, right? As opposed to a non-native or other kind of museum that's requesting those kinds of items. That's a good point. Thanks, Risa.
That's great. And what about, I remember having a conversation with Rick West at one point, and he mentioned that NMAI really has a policy about what they display, and that if anything fits in those categories, even if it's not repatriatable, it's not going to be displayed. Is that accurate?
I wonder, I'm not quite sure how to answer that the best way. Obviously, there are certain items that just wouldn't go on display by default, right? Obviously, human remains and, AFOs, bundles. I mean, there are certain things that would not go on display. And so are you thinking in terms, Shannon, is that more in terms for things that NMAI would display or NMAI would loan?
I'm just talking about display. I think the question was asking about the display of as well as the loaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think well, and for NMAI, I think that again, there's probably when you spoke with Rick about that, the process has evolved substantially since then, I would say. And there's probably a much more of a refinement to that thought process, especially here in the last couple of years.
And I can imagine it can be refined by tribal consultation, right? So that probably is the final deciding factor on any display from the NMAI. Is that correct?
They work with definitely with tribes and engaging in the exhibition process. When the museum first started, when the museum opened, there was a big effort with community consultation, and it kind of went through some waning years, I'd say. But I think here in the last few years, it's definitely become, it's risen to the top again, I'd say, in terms of how important that is.
So I also have a plug, and I don't know if this might actually be in connection with Lillian's next question, but I just kind of also want to plug a new, it's been in effect for the last couple of years, and it's through the collections department called Community Loans Program. And so within repatriation, we're beholden to a set of categories that have certain definitions. But if there are certain items that are explicitly important to the communities, this new Community Loans Program works to do long-term loans with different communities. So they've recently done one with down in Poake in New Mexico at the Poe Center. And they're working with the Macaw right now for long-term community loans. So that's also a new avenue that's opened up that is working to facilitate.
And would you want to respond to Lillian's question then, specifically, if a tribe requests a loan of an item, what's the difference between that and a repatriation? Is there a reason a tribe would only ask for an item to be loaned as opposed to asking for it to be returned permanently?
That seems like that's a very tribal specific position. A loan process is handled through our registration department, whereas we obviously just deal with repatriation matters. And so we have had situations where tribes have requested the loan or to seek out what the loan situation is simultaneously to a repatriation, and really it's just a very tribal specific. Sometimes it might be they might be able to turn around a loan request quicker than a repatriation claim, and so there's that factor. Yeah, it really is up to a tribe on how they want to approach such situations. The other thing to keep in mind, well, I don't want to speak for a tribe, so I would just say it's a tribal specific situation.
Good answer, Jackie. So let me, since we're a little bit after 2 o'clock right now, where is the best place folks can go to learn more about the repatriation program? I know that you put at the NMAI, you put the repatriation policy up in the chat, a link to that. Is there anything that can really explain the process that you can provide a link for?
Lauren, I don't know if you want to speak to that. You posted some stuff earlier, right? It's our website. If folks go to our website, we've got a repatriation page that's there that has the step by step. It's got the program guide. It has a little bit of information in the background. It has our congressional annual reports. Yeah, I think that's probably the best place. And we also have, I can't remember, is it the FAQ section where there's other links to other repatriation related topics?
So the main website, I know there's some PDFs and reports on here, is americanindian.si.edu. And if you search repatriation NMAI, you'll probably pop it up. There it is. The repatriation guidelines in a PDF. And learn more about NMAI. Jackie, Risa, Samantha, Lauren, or Nancy, do you have anything you'd like to add as we're closing up?
Yeah, I just want to add something that I don't think that this gets enough kind of play, which, Nancy, when she came on, she talked about our database management, and that, it may not sound like that is that's a big deal. It does not get enough attention. That retention of knowledge and understanding, and that fluidity that passes from one staff to the next, to the history of our department, it is so key. And we have the system called, well, you don't need to know this, it's ATO, but it's a database management system, and where some museums might have a database for their collections. It's very specific to that collection, that specific item. This is a legal database management system, and it captures the case history. And if for all of the folks working out there, if you've ever stepped into a new role, and you come in and you're like, where are all the papers? Where's all the history? What's the work that they did with this museum? Where do I start? Like, we had the same problem, and a big one at that. And we took some time and effort and organized ourselves, and still in that process, because it's a lot of paperwork to input, and you scan and input all of this, but it is a way to hold and keep and document and pass on to future us all of that history of particular instances of when a tribe came in, and here's how this case landed, or here's how a board made a determination and why. And it just has that like history of that. And I really just want to underscore the importance of maintaining that knowledge for your future you and whatever role you are. It is really, really important.
I guess just in closing, I want to thank everybody for sharing their stories and their questions. It's really great to to talk about this with more people. You know, sometimes we get stuck in our own little vacuums, especially in this work from home era. So it's been really great getting to speak with everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. Look forward to next year and being able to be in a room together so we can have more conversation. But if you think of anything after today that you'd like to ask, you can find all of our contact information on our website. And we love to hear from people. So please let us hear if you have anything you want to ask or know, or just say hi.
Yeah, we also have a main repatriation email if you can't remember our names or which one of us you want to ask questions to. And that's on our website as well. We're happy to hear from folks.
Yeah, I have to agree with Samantha's comment about the work from home era. You find yourself in a vacuum. So it has been really nice to hear all of your stories and questions. So please always feel free to reach out. We are more than happy to share, as hopefully you have gotten from this past hour.
Yeah, I want to thank each and every one who at NMAI for taking the time with us.